The proper way to tax the super rich has to involve some kind of tax based on wealth. The super rich pay much less tax relative to their income than the rest of the population.
You want to help the poor, not hurt the rich. Have you ever heard of an economy taxed into prosperity? Give me a break. Just look at what happened up in Scotland recently. They raised the tax there. What happened to revenues? Hello, they went down.
Why should some people be allowed to pay zero when the rest of the population must pay? This is a blatant violation of this basic principle of equality before the law.
I don't disagree with anything Gabriel just said. He's just got the wrong answer.
Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. I'm Matt Frei. Britain is strapped for cash. Public services are under pressure, defence spending is rising, and the government has promised not to raise the big taxes on working people. So where does the money come from? Well, many on the left have lobbied for a wealth tax, which, as I say, could raise billions of pounds every year. But would taxing the ultra-rich actually raise billions that Britain needs? Or would the wealthy simply move their money, or indeed themselves, elsewhere? And in a country where owning assets, such as a house, often defines your wealth more than your salary does, has Britain been taxing the wrong stuff all along? To discuss all this, I'm joined by Gabriel Zucman, one of the world's leading economists on wealth inequality and the author of We Need to Tax Billionaires, and Arthur Laffer, the economist behind the Laffer Curve and a long-time advocate for lower taxes. Welcome to you both. It's a real pleasure to have both of you with me today on the Fourcast. Let me start with you, Gabriel. What is a wealth tax?
Well, a wealth tax is a tax on your net worth, meaning the total value of your assets, net of debts. What we're talking about today is not actually about your wealth. It's not about the wealth of everybody who's listening to us. It's about taxing billionaires, people who have more than £1 billion or dollars in net wealth. And their fortune has exploded over the last 40 years. It's been one of the most important developments in the world economy of the last decades, the upsurge of billionaire wealth. This wealth is barely taxed. This wealth translates into enormous power, so taxing it is long overdue.
Okay, and just for the record, where would you set the actual level of wealth where you think a tax should kick in?
As I said, where the boom in wealth has been particularly striking is above $1 billion or pounds. Now, there's an argument for starting a bit below that, let's say at about £100 million. That's the proposal that I have formulated for the G20 in 2024, when the G20 put this issue on its agenda. And I advocated for a minimum tax for those super rich individuals equal to 2% of their wealth each year. But you have to understand that quantitatively, among that group of super rich people, those who have more than £100 million, it's really the billionaires that have most of the money. There's a lot of inequality in general, but there's also a lot of inequality among the class of super rich people.
Arthur, over to you. What's wrong with taxing the billionaires?
Well, you won't get the money first place. You'll destroy production in the second place. You know, Britain in 1950 was about 6.5% of world GDP. Today, it's less than 3% of world GDP. There's been a decline in Britain for a long, long time. You have a tax system that's just a hodgepodge of dysfunctional policies all put in there together, adding another highly dysfunctional specific policy to get the rich is my mind, is a major mistake. You won't get the money, just like Scotland didn't get the money, just like Gordon Brown didn't get the money. It just didn't come in. But the dream here is to get a lower tax rate and a broader tax base. So you provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. And you have the broadest possible tax base, so they have the least places where they can stick their income and avoid paying taxes. If you did that, you could bring Britain's revenues back up dramatically through economic growth. My model is very simply, our problem is don't tax the rich. make the production base easier so that everyone can become rich. Balance up, not down. Help the poor. Don't hurt the rich. It's not going to help Britain at all, by the way.
Okay, but I want to look at some of the different, what you're suggesting, some of the different recipes for taxation that are out there a little bit further down the line, but just focusing on those very wealthy individuals. I mean, a lot of them have published letters in newspapers. They've written to governments and said, please tax us more, including Warren Buffett, one of the wisest investors that ever existed.
Lovely example.
Exactly. And
lovely example. I mean, I know the Warren Buffett example inside out.
Right.
And
so what do you think of it?
Well, I think he's wrong in the sense that he shouldn't have tax rates raised. He should have his whole unrealized capital gains be part of his income tax base. If you got his total income in 2010, which he reported as being about $40 million, it was really $12.5 billion. If you tax that total income during that period, you would get huge amounts of increased revenues. He would be free to go forward and produce more, and you'd get the thing done, not by attacking his wealth. Make it so the tax codes don't allow rich people to avoid paying taxes by having a broad tax base. That's the way to go. And if you don't go that way now, you're doomed to have despair and poverty for as long as the eye can see.
Okay. Arthur, on those very wealthy individuals, if they were to give up 2% of their wealth, and we're talking about these, super rich billionaires, I mean, they're not going to be missing meals at the end of it, and they might not even be disincentivized to carry on with their business because it is such a tiny amount of money that they overall possess, or of their overall assets. Why not go down that road?
Well, because they'll leave. I mean, they don't want to give you that money. They don't think that's a fair tax. They think it's really discriminatory. And they will do just like they've always done, is leave. I mean, when you look at those states in the United States that have income taxes and those that don't have income taxes, the 9 are the best performers. If you look at what happened when Gordon Brown raised taxes on the rich who could easily afford it, what happened? Revenues went down, not up, and the system got more complicated, and the economy underperformed. If you look at the Scottish tax, I mean, just look at what happened up in Scotland recently. They raised the tax there. What happened to revenues? Hello, they went down. The capital gains tax, HMRC, estimates that the capital gains tax increase, bringing it up to the normal rate of 45p, will lose money. I mean, why would you raise taxes if you don't collect any revenues? And that's really where do it where you collect revenues, which is broadening the base and allowing more production. You don't solve affordability by curtailing production of goods and services. You just don't. You need to balance up, not down in Britain. You've been balancing down for way too long. And I love you dearly. You're my soul. I'm not a Brit. I don't have a dog in the fight, but I just love your country. And I just want to see nothing other than your prosperity.
Gabriel, you just heard what Arthur had to say. Essentially, that if you tax the super wealthy, they just up sticks. They move to another country. They move to a jurisdiction with lower tax rates. That's a fair point, isn't it?
Well, that's the traditional argument, but it's not very compelling because you could simply say that, okay, if they move to some other country, we will keep taxing them, right? So that's probably what the US does. The US has taxation that's based upon citizenship, meaning if you are US national, and you move to some other country, you have to keep paying your taxes in the US until you die. Now, the other countries, like the UK, they don't do like that. They do the kind of the opposite extreme. They say, well, if you've become very rich in the UK, and now you decide to move to Dubai or Switzerland, then immediately we stop taxing you. It doesn't make any sense. I think the right way to do this is a kind of in between, a middle ground between the US system and what other countries do. So very concretely, the UK could say, if you've lived for a long time in the UK and you've become very rich here, and now you move to a low tax country, we're going to keep taxing you as if you were still a resident of the UK for, let's say, 10 years, but not until you die, like in the US case, but 5, 10, 15 years, we can discuss. And that's it. It would remove dramatically any incentive to move to a low tax place for pure tax reasons. So it's really important to understand that this international tax competition is not a law of nature like gravity. You tax the rich, they move to Dubai. That's not how it works. It's a policy choice. Either we choose to allow this outmigration, this tax exile to exist, just like we can choose to fight it.
Arthur?
Yeah, I just think that putting more regulations, more rules on top of your already complex, arcane, dysfunctional tax codes will not
No,
work.
but
But yes, I
hang
don't.
on.
Yeah,
The American system, as Gabriel just has
yes,
outlined.
I agree with this point.
I mean, so is that not an idea? I mean, if
Yeah, it is. Of course it is.
right,
Yeah, of course it is.
and so that
Yeah.
would basically deal with at least some of those both individuals trying to leave
Well,
the
but you
country.
know, then you have to balance it with all the rest of the stuff there. If you tax non-doms, I think that's what you call them, as ordinary people there in Britain, like we do in the US, that would be good. You can do that, but you also want to lower the rates and broaden the base so it collects it. But it's not a wealth tax that you want to go after. If you've got income taxes and net sales taxes and VATs, which are bases, you don't want to then tax wealth, which is a stock. You just don't. You see what happens when that happens with property taxes in the US. What happened to Illinois in the 30s when they raised property tax, which is a wealth tax. What happened in California when they had the 2.7% wealth tax before Proposition 13. You never mix wealth taxes with income taxes because you'll get a dysfunctional system that just won't work. You need to provide jobs to people. You want to help the poor, not hurt the rich. You want to bring the rich back in and production back in. In Kennedy's statement that I love so much is the best form of welfare is still a good, high-paying job. And that's where we want to go, is create prosperity. And Britain has been doing just the reverse. They've been taxing people who work and paying people who don't work, and then being shocked when a lot of people don't work. Come on, it's economics. Incentives matter.
Gabriel?
I think that the notion that just by asking the super rich to pay as much tax as the rest of the population, you're going somehow to destroy the economy, that doesn't withstand scrutiny. The problem today, just so that everybody understands, the problem is that the super rich pay much less tax relative to their income than the rest of the population. And I think many people suspected this was the case, but there's also a great deal of opacity about that. You don't have official government statistics about this issue. And it's only over the last 4 or 5 years that there's been rigorous research that's been conducted by academics in partnership with tax administrations in different countries to establish the facts. And what they've found is that many places, almost everywhere, the billionaires pay almost no income tax. So a few years ago, you had revelation by the US media, ProPublica, on the taxes paid by US billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, in some years paying very little. There's even one year when Bezos says, look, I'm so poor that I'm going to claim the child tax credit. And he receives the child tax credit. He receives a check from the IRS, one of the wealthiest person in the world. And there's nothing illegal in any of this. It's just how the system works. But the system doesn't work. The income tax, by and large, is a success for most of the population, fulfills its goal. But the billionaires have not yet entered into the system. It's an unfinished revolution.
So as far as you're concerned, so this is a basic question of fairness more than one of actual, raising more money. It's about fairness.
It's about 3 things. It's number one, and most importantly, it's a basic question of equality before the law. Why should some people be allowed to pay zero when the rest of the population must pay? This is a blatant violation of this basic principle of equality before the law, which is no small thing. This is really at the center, at the core of the rule of law and what it means to live in a democracy.
Okay, I'm not sure whether Arthur's agreeing with you or not.
I agree with him wholeheartedly. I don't disagree with anything Gabriel just said. He's just got the wrong answer. The wrong answer is not to go after a new tax on wealth. It's to correct the income tax, to not allow all those deductions, exemptions, exclusions. That's why I went in the discussion of Warren Buffett. He's one of the greatest guys in the world. But of course, he's going to take all the tax deductions he's allowed to take. And that means they are not paying their fair share. They're not. Correct the tax codes, because if you add a new one on top, you're going to get no results. You're going to create more poverty and despair. Go back and correct the problem as it exists, making the tax pay their fair share by broadening the base, not allowing them to have those deductions, and doing it the correct way the first time around, rather than adding more complication and dysfunction.
So just a quick one there.
The problem,
go on, Gabriel.
can I explain? Because of course, if it was just a matter of plugging loopholes and fixing problems with the income tax, then we should do that and it would be easy. The problem is more complicated than that. It's not because those billionaires exploit loopholes that they pay so little in income tax. It's because the very notion of income for the super rich is not well defined. It's very easy when you are a billionaire to structure your wealth such that your wealth will generate little or sometimes no taxable income. So for instance, how did Bezos do to pay no income tax and to receive the child tax credit? Well, that's quite easy. As CEO of Amazon, he didn't pay himself a wage. He instructed the company not to distribute any dividends. He didn't sell shares, hence he didn't realize any capital gains and didn't pay capital gains tax. So his taxable income, what shows up on his tax return, and it's not a matter of exploiting loopholes, was very low. So from the perspective of the tax
loopholes, Gabriel. Those are loopholes.
Okay, so what I'm saying is just for the super rich, wealth is a much better indicator of the ability to pay taxes than income. Because wealth, the value of what you own, is much harder to manipulate when you are a billionaire than income. That's why the proper way to tax the super rich has to involve some kind of tax based on wealth. And let me just add one more thing. These are ideas that have been long understood, including by people in the US. So for instance, in 1949, there was a commission of US economists who went to Japan to advise the new Japanese government on their tax system, how to build a tax system in a new modern democracy. The Shoup Commission, very prestigious US academics of the time, William Frei, who went on to win the Nobel Prize, was part of it. And what they said is, first, you need to have a very progressive income tax, just like we, the US, had at the time in 1950. But it's not enough because for the super rich, the income tax structurally is too limited for them. They need to have a wealth tax on top of that. And the idea that the wealth tax is a necessary backstop is the right way to tax the super rich. And it's frankly, it's part of the democracy package. To create a well-functioning democracy, you need to put constraints to extreme wealth. You need to make sure that they are part of society, that they cannot live in their own parallel society. This type of ideas has been understood, frankly, for a very long time.
I know the commission you talk about very well, and the one in Germany did the same thing. The way Germany and Japan became enormously prosperous is they cut their tax rates dramatically, creating enormous economic growth in Japan and Germany from those very high levels before. The problem is not with the rich. The problem is with the poor, and how do we provide the poor with opportunities and abilities to be able to increase their lot in life? And you don't do that by taxing the investors and the producers there. You do it by correcting the tax code and making low rate, broad-based flat tax to give everyone an equal chance to create growth. You do it the Kennedy way, you do it the Reagan way, you do it the Harding-Coolidge way, you do it the way that it was done in Germany and in Japan post-war by cutting those tax rates and creating the growth, not by going after the rich.
But Arthur, the discrepancy between rich and poor, in Germany in the 1950s or in Japan, well, it wasn't huge then. It is Yeah, it is much bigger now. And it's a question, it's also a question of fairness. And I think, Gabriel, you hinted at that. And if fairness is not respected, and people at the bottom end of the pile, which is still the vast numeric majority, feel that they're getting a raw deal and people at the top are not getting the same deal, then that has political consequences. And those
100%
political
agree.
consequences can be explosive. And we've seen some of them play out since the great financial crisis in America and in Europe. So for that reason alone, this should be addressed. And it can be addressed, I would say, some would say, by taxing the wealth of the very richest in society.
But it won't work. If you correct the income taxes so that the rich do pay their increases in unrealized capital gains should be taxed as income, reductions should be deductible, that would be a huge increase. Warren Buffett's income, Craig Simon's income in 2010 was $12.5 billion, and he reported an income of 40 million taxable income because he used all those loopholes. Get rid of those loopholes, which many people, every economist has agreed that it should be a low rate, broad-based flat tax where increases in unrealized capital gains are income and reductions are there.
So, Gabriel, let me ask you, if you were, I guess to call something like paying yourself with a dividend, which has a much lower tax rate than your income tax, is a massive loophole. It's a $1 billion pound sized loophole. If you close those loopholes, the way with which people like Jeff Bezos pay themselves, or allow themselves to continue their extraordinary lifestyle without paying any taxes, is that a loophole you can close? And if you closed it, would it arrive at the solution that you're looking for?
Yeah, look, there are lots of loopholes with the income tax that should be closed, right? So the fact that investment income, like dividends or capital gains, are often taxed at lower rates than wages, I think there's no good justification for that. We should close that loophole. The fact that capital gains in many countries disappear at death, those famous step up in basis at death, that's a famous loophole that should be closed. So there's a long list, and I fully agree with that. I think that's necessary, but that's not sufficient, because now imagine that we taxed dividends at a higher rate. The whole problem is that those billionaires, they don't earn any dividends. They instruct their companies not to distribute any dividends. So whatever the rate is applied to this non-existent income, for them makes no difference. Again, that's why for them, the proper base is wealth rather than income. And let me just add that we agree with Arthur. We agree with Arthur that the goal of all this is to help low-income individuals, is to help the working class thrive. And we just have different ideas about how to get there, and also different reading of history. My reading of history, and I think the most important, frankly, lesson from world economic history, is that what has made countries like the UK, the US prosperous over the course of the 20th century is mass investment in education, in healthcare, in public infrastructure that makes businesses productive. And all of that requires tax revenues, right? And we're not going to be able to face the challenges, to meet the challenges that we face in the 21st century. We need to invest more in higher education. We need more investment in infrastructure to deal with climate change without additional tax increases. Now, if you ask those who already pay a lot to pay more, while those who have most benefited from the economic system, the billionaires over the last decades, are not asked to contribute more, that is not sustainable. That is not going to happen.
But you're not going to get the money. Just look at what happened when Gordon Brown raised the tax. You lost money. Look at the report of the checker.
So let's finish the conclusion. Let's finish the discussion on that, because you say it's not going to raise the money, and your argument was they're going to leave. And I answered that. I said, no, if you keep taxing them after they leave, so then what are the other ways they could avoid the wealth tax?
They stop paying dividends. There are trillions of ways they do it.
But I think it would be useful to kind of understand exactly the reasons in your mind why this would fail. And so you mentioned that they would leave. I think I provided an answer to that argument. What are the other reasons why a wealth tax, in your words, on billionaires wouldn't generate revenue? What would happen?
They will shelter. They will do all sorts of things. We will have it there. Unrealized capital gains are the biggest loophole in the U.S., as you know. Gifts to 501c3s are also tax exempt entities, as you know. These are all the ways they do it. That's why the top 400 income earners and wealthiest people in the U.S. do not pay taxes. Just do a correct definition of income. If you make 30 times as much as I do, you should pay 30 times as much in taxes as I do, but not 4 billion times as much as I do. You want a low rate, broad based, flat tax that's simple, understood, and doesn't stop people from doing better in life. This is a balance up model, not a balance down. You look at what balancing down has done to Britain in the last 75 years, and it's tragic. It's just tragic. The once ruler of the world is now in real difficulty. The poor are really poorer, and they try to solve it in Scotland. You saw what happened there. You saw what happens everywhere. And let's do something that works.
The reason why we no longer rule the waves and have an empire are manifold, and I think some of them may have to do with our taxation, and there are quite a few other reasons as well. But the point is, Arthur, that you have to see. I guess you have to see taxes as part of the broader societal framework or political framework, and if the income divide continues the way that it has done for the last 10, 20 years, and the rich get that much richer, and everyone else stays on the same level, you have a massive problem. Questions of inequality and unfairness become politically explosive. And I think that is why some of these billionaires have been writing letters saying, please do more to tax us. So why don't we listen to them? Why don't you listen to them for a bit?
I do. I just gave you Warren Buffett's the one when he said, tax me more, please, please, please. And he got the Medal of Freedom as a result, then that's great. But what you want to look at is facts, not opinions. I mean, everyone's got an opinion. This is about facts, not how you feel. What happens when you go and tax the rich? That's a fact right now. What you want to do is tax the rich by eliminating the deductions, exemptions, and exclusions. Make it so the tax base includes increases in those. That's the way to solve it for the long run. You've got a complicated tax system now that is totally dysfunctional. And if you don't think they can, have you ever heard of an economy taxed into prosperity? Give me a break. Come on. Poor people can't spend themselves into wealth, and a country can't be taxed into prosperity. Make it so that it is fair. The tax codes are fair. We totally agree on the distribution of income. We totally agree on all of these things on fairness. You're just going at it the wrong way. The problem is not the rich. The problem is, how do you provide opportunities for the poor and the low income to balance up by a low rate, broad-based, flat tax and let them go at it? That's the way it is done in this world if you want to be successful. If you want to be a failure, I can go along with you all the way. And you have been failures on the taxing the rich for years and years. Do something this time that works. That's all I ask. Look at the facts, not have.
Okay, Gabriel.
I think what I find funny and perhaps somewhat unexpected in that conversation is that if we leave aside the rhetoric, I think on the substance, we're not so far with Arthur.
No, you're not.
There is
You're just
some
wrong.
convergence on two specific points. One is that you emphasize how important it is to have a broad base with no loophole whatsoever, no way to avoid the tax. And that's precisely what I had in mind when I designed this proposal for an unavoidable minimum tax on wealth for the super rich. Meaning, one of the big mistakes that was made in different European countries, in particular, that had wealth taxes in the past, is that those taxes indeed were full of loopholes, and so the super rich ended up not paying them. And frankly, I've been a bit traumatized by that experience, and hence what I've proposed is to do the opposite of that, is to have a tax on wealth that starts really high in the distribution, only if you have more than 100 million pounds, but in exchange for this very high exemption threshold, no loophole, no deduction whatsoever. So that's number one. And number two, you prefer and you advocate for a tax on unrealized capital gains.
Increases
Basically what you say is we should tax the increase in wealth.
But they aren't taxed at all now. As you say, there's a step-up basis of death. They're not taxed at all.
what you're saying is that someone whose wealth moves from 1 billion to 101 billion, so they gain 100 billion, we should tax that 100 billion as income,
Yes.
presumably subject to the ordinary income tax rate of whatever, 30, 40%. So it's a huge tax, right? 40% on 100 billion in the rise in wealth. And what I'm saying is, in fact, in many ways, much more moderate and limited than that. Is just we should tax 2%, 2%, not 40%, 2% of the 101 billion. And I think I don't disagree with you that there is a good case for taxing unrealized capital gains. And the main difference with the proposal for a straight wealth tax is that unrealized capital gains are very volatile. So in 1 year,
But please
the
be
wealth of people
careful.
is going to increase a lot, and then it's going
I
to
say
fall. And
increases in unrealized capital gains, not capital gains.
I suspect some of your billionaire friends, Arthur, might actually prefer to live in Gabriel's country and not in your country.
But they may well, and you can see why I like Gabriel and Emmanuel so much, is they have the right problem. They're looking at it, but you have to solve it to where it works. A low rate, broad-based flat tax, like we did with Reagan, really worked. It really worked.
I love the fact you disagree and then actually agree with each other vociferously. Let me ask you this. First of all, you, Gabriel, then Arthur. Gabriel, is there a country in the world, anywhere in the world, that has solved this problem adequately, in your opinion?
No. All countries face the same problem, that the income tax that was created most of the time about 100 years ago at the beginning of the 20th century remains this unfinished revolution. The billionaires are not part of it. And no country has properly addressed that. Some countries have tried to tax wealth. As I said, many European countries used to have a wealth tax. The historical record is not good. Those wealth taxes didn't work well, which you can look at this history in two ways. You can say, we tried to tax wealth, it didn't work, hence it will never work. Or you can try to look at it in another way and say, okay, look, let's try to understand the problems, the mistakes that were made, and whether those problems have solutions. And that's what we, my colleagues and I have done in our research work. And our conclusion is that there was a number of issues, like rich people fleeing to low-tax countries, or at least threatening to move to low-tax countries is one example. But these two or three problems, they all have very clear solutions. And so we just need to create another type of billionaire wealth tax today.
Or maybe create another type of country. Arthur, is there a country in the world that you think comes close to the way you would like to see taxation applied?
Well, there are episodes in this country. For example, what happened under Harding and Coolidge was perfect. We created the Roaring 20s. The opposite was in the 30s when we raised tax rates up to 94%. What Reagan did I thought was great. What Thatcher did in Britain, dropping a rate from in the 90s down to 40p, I thought that was good. We've seen what Erhard did in Germany, what happened in Japan. Those are all exceptionally good. When you look at this, that's the way I go. It's just that, when you talk about a wealth tax as being only 2%, it's 2% of wealth, which is equivalent to about 24% of income. Wealth is a stock, not a flow. And wealth taxes are enormously powerful tax entities. And, it's the wrong way. You want to never mix stocks and flows in your tax system, ever, ever, ever. And we have a flow system with a VAT, with an income tax, with a net final sales tax. Those are great tax bases. Cure those problems, and you've solved. And I do like Gabriel and Emmanuel, and I love the work they've done. But in their work, Matt, if I could just say one last thing, and then I'll stop. Using their data every single time we've raised tax rates in the top 1% of income earners, three things have happened. The economy is underperformed, tax revenues from the rich have gone down, and the poor have been hammered. Every single time we've reduced tax rates on the rich, three things have happened. The economy has outperformed, tax revenues from the rich have gone up, and the poor have had opportunities to prosper. You can look at that, the data. My book, Taxes Have Consequences, which, by the way, Gabriel, is based on your data. We use your center data. It's great data. It's just plain factually wrong what you're saying. That's all. You're a wonderful man wanting to solve a wonderful problem, and you too, Matt. But you're going into this is about facts, not opinions. And I hope Burnham doesn't take a politically. He's a wonderful guy. I'm so glad he's prime minister, and Healy is terrific. These guys have a chance of really making a difference, and a wealth tax is not going to be the right answer.
What would you advise our new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, on this great island to do in order to balance the books, rekindle growth? This is something that he is pledged to do, and get us out of this economic funk. Gabriel, you first.
My advice would be to introduce a minimum tax for the super rich, those who have more than 100 million pounds in wealth. We're talking about 1,000 families, roughly. A minimum tax equal to 2% of their wealth. If they already pay in income tax the equivalent of 2% of their wealth, they wouldn't have anything extra to pay. But if they pay less than that, so if they are both extremely rich and avoid taxes today, then they would have to pay a bit more. According to the estimates that we have, this would generate between 10 and 15 billion pounds in additional tax revenue each year. It's the fairest tax you can imagine, because it's both on the super rich and those among the super rich who avoid paying their fair share today.
Okay, but just to push back on that a little bit, in the absence of a tax system that you outlined earlier, where we have an American-style federal tax that you pay if you're an American citizen wherever you live in the world. So that's not going to happen in the next 3 months or even 3 years, right? So we're going to... But I just don't think that that's on the books. I don't think it's been planned, and it'll probably take too long. So let's say in the next budget, which is on October the 28th, Andy Burnham were to announce a wealth tax along the lines that you've described. What is there to prevent those 100 families from doing what Arthur said they would do, which is to literally say, we're out of here, we're leaving?
I think the law has to be written like this. Paragraph 1, there is this 2% minimum tax that's introduced. Paragraph 2, this minimum tax would keep applying for 10 years after people move outside of the UK, period. That's how the law has to be written. And the idea that we cannot do that, it would take many years, look, I don't buy it. When the UK created the income tax in 1909, was created very fast. It happened like that, and it was more than a century ago, the progressive income tax. So why today in 2026 it would take many years before we can change the law to just add 2 short paragraphs? It's not a complicated law to write. But where I agree with you is that if a country like the UK was to do that, it's important to say that people are not going to be able to avoid the tax just by moving to Dubai. No, this has to become impossible. They move, that's their right, freedom of movement, but nothing changes. Nothing would change for them from a tax perspective. They would still be subject to this 2% minimum tax on their wealth.
Okay, Arthur, we're dealing with 100 families, right, that earn this amount of money. Wouldn't it be better just to invite them to Chequers for a long weekend with the Prime Minister, and he could use some of his charm to remind them of the concept of fairness? And maybe they'll listen then.
Yeah, I agree. They understand that too, by the way. They do it because they can. The legal system is such that they can use all these deductions, and they do. And, I don't think it's right that they do, but that shouldn't be something we put on a moral code. We should make it into the law that these are not deductions that you can use. If you asked me the same question you asked Gabriel, what Andrew Burnham should do, I would say reduce the highest tax rate from 45p down to 30p and get rid of an equivalent amount of static revenue loss by getting rid of deductions, leaving the country, doing all that stuff. And you will create a political economy of growth in Britain that will bring you back into the modern world where we all want you to be a partner, a really productive, healthy, prosperous Britain.
Arthur, listen, I have 2 words for you to your proposal.
Yes, sir.
And one of them is Liz, and the other one is Truss. Okay, she wanted to lower the tax rates. She did lower the tax rates, but she was still going to carry on spending money and then just borrowed more, and the bond markets went nuts.
Well, as you know,
and her
Liz Truss
government
never got
lasted
the
less
policy.
long than the average, head of lettuce in a supermarket. So
Yeah, as you know, Liz Truss never got those policies in place. She was thrown out much sooner than that. Rishi Sunak came in right afterwards. So Kwasi Kwarteng's plan was not put into effect. It wasn't. She was really hounded
are you
out of the
saying it
place.
would have worked?
I do think it would have worked. Yes, that's my view. Uh, I'm wrong a lot. I never try to be wrong, but I do think it would have worked, and I think it would have worked very well. And I think Burnham, with the control he has of the parliament right now, could do a lot of good. He's got that control for a long time to come. I think the next time he has to call an election is 3 years. He has time to sit there and do the right thing and watch the fruits of his labors pay off in Britain, which is a blessing that the political system rarely gets. And I just hope he uses this to create growth, not to create envy and jealousy, and go in that direction. And I think Britain can be brought back within 3 years quite substantially if he were to do that. And again, I'd love to sit down with him or with Healy and talk about that. But if they ask me, I'll be there. But
I mean,
I think they
what,
have
Arthur?
no chance.
I'm hazarding a guess here that they're probably very happy to talk to you. But if they lower the tax rates to 30%, the top tax rates, I'm afraid they won't be very happy to talk to anyone in their own party because they'll probably be booted out before you can say breakfast.
Get the deductions out of there. Get an equivalent pound revenue neutral deductions out, like moving to Dubai, maybe your thing of 10 years, Gabriel, or whatever it would be. Get rid of all those deductions so you have a static revenue loss from the tax rate reduction, and you have a static revenue gain from the getting rid of all the exemptions, exclusions, loopholes, write-offs, credits, omissions, all that garbage. And you do that and see what would happen to Britain. You'd take off like a jackrabbit in the summer. But you'd be a prosperous nation.
Maybe not in this summer because it's been a bit hot and most jackrabbits are probably sensible enough to hide under a tree. Final question to both of you. First, you, Gabriel. If this problem isn't fixed, either your way or Arthur's way, what are the consequences for our society?
I think the main risk is to see an acceleration of the upsurge in wealth concentration, wealth inequality, which is corrosive for society. Extreme wealth is always an extreme power, and extreme concentration of wealth clashes with our basic democratic ideals. So we need to invent a new way to regulate this wealth and regulate this extreme power.
Arthur, consequences if we don't fix it?
Yeah, I think you'll just continue slugging along, declining as a power in the world. And, as you know, the number of millionaires and billionaires in Britain has been shrinking quite dramatically. And I think that will just continue, and you'll continue to seep on down until you become, Algeria, Ethiopia, whatever that is. It's a very
most of
slow,
society isn't that
strangled
fussed
death.
about the number of billionaires and millionaires. I mean, that's not the metric by which our society judges its success.
No, I agree. They are investors there. There's only been one billionaire moving to Britain in the past 4 years. No, but I think you'll just continue declining. And that's really a sad state when I look at the British system. I mean, I just think you've declined long enough. We need to rule the waves, not wave the rules. And I think it's really important for Britain to try to come back and become a prosperous nation by creating incentives.
I bet you've used that line before. We're going to leave it there.
I have.
Of course. Arthur Laffer, Gabriel Zucman, thank you very much to both of you for coming on the Fourcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it illuminating, and see you next time.